Lesotho soldiers. First-class men, all highly trained by him, and they all love him. Don't think the Basutos are going to get into that donga where those trees now are and attempt to try and stop what is called the Zulu left-hand horn, coming around to the southern undefended side of the camp. With me?
Yeah.
Come back from those trees all the way back towards the road. Just the other side of the road where the donga starts, see all that broken ground there? That we call a flay or a swamp area. It's going to play a major part in this battle. One needs to see that they're really wet with long grass. Again, go back down to the road, turn right. Go along the road until you come to the second bend, opposite those two white vehicles. It's very difficult to see this. It's a road that goes all the way across the front of the mountain. That road wasn't there in 1879, but today that road would represent the front line of the British tented area. So the camp is right up against the mountain, where the burnt grass is now. Once more, one sitting on what is called the Nuta Ridge. It was run from the Magaga Knoll to our west, 4 miles to our east at Tusi Heights. Over the top of the Nuta Ridge is the Nuta Plateau. It's open grassland, but it's very undulating ground, but it is open grassland. One final point, no trees here, look to your right. Come down this ridge, that we call a neck. The bottom of the ridge, you've got another ridge running off to the west. It's got no trees on it, it's called a spur. And this side of the spur, just got to use your imagination, there's a very substantial valley running on the edge of the spur off to the west, this side of it. Got a bit of a picture? Sure? Well done. And he had confederated Canada in 1867, and the concept had worked extremely well. He now decides the same system will work well here in southern Africa. In southern Africa we have 5 regions. We have the Boer Republic of the Transvaal up in the north. Coming down the coast you've got Natal, the Eastern Cape, the Cape Inland, you've got the Free State. Each area is totally different and has totally different problems, but Lord Carnarvon doesn't appreciate that. But he sends a man out here called James Freud to go negotiate with the authorities in each one of these regions to try and persuade them into the concept of confederation. Freud has now been out here for approximately 1 year, and he's not getting anywhere. Nobody likes the idea. But nevertheless, Lord Carnarvon decides to go ahead. And he puts together a team, and the team really consists of himself, a man called Shepstone, and the most important character was a man called Sir Bartle Frere. Sir Bartle Frere is sent out here from Britain. He becomes the British High Commissioner, and prior to leaving London he's been told to go ahead and confederate Southern Africa. Frere has now been out here for approximately 2 years, and he cannot see how he can possibly confederate Southern Africa just as long as there's this independent Zulu army of somewhere between 40 to 55,000 Zulu warriors who are basically allowed to roam around wherever they feel like. So in brief, what he's going to do, he's going to draw up an ultimatum which he's going to hand to the Zulu king. It's a 9-point ultimatum, but the most important aspect is the Zulu king has to agree to disband his army within 30 days of the 11th of December 1878. If he doesn't, then a man called Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford, who's the commanding officer of the British forces in Southern Africa at the time, we ordered to invade Zululand for the sole purpose of disbanding that Zulu army. Well, quite obviously there's no way the Zulu king could possibly disband his army. The whole structure of the Zulu nation is built around a military one. So consequently, by midnight on the 10th of January 1879, the Zulu king hasn't met any of the terms of the ultimatum, and Sir Bartle Frere orders Lord Chelmsford to commence his invasion of Zululand, which he starts the following morning at 3:30. In a nutshell, that's it. Then there's a central column, that's the one we're going to talk about today, of 4,800 men, which is basically under the command of Lord Chelmsford himself. And 80 miles to our north, the third column under the command of Colonel Evelyn Wood, a column of 4,500 strong. All 3 columns are very set off from the Durban-Pietermaritzburg area, approximately 300 kilometres to our southeast, and they start to make their way up towards the Zululand border. As far as the central column was concerned, of course the Buffalo River was the border between Natal and Zululand. Lord Chelmsford now moves his column to a place called Helpmachar, approximately 1 hand's width to the right-hand side of the Osgood Mountain, right up on top of the Helpmachar Plateau. There he builds a base camp. At the same time, he sends his scouts down to the Buffalo River to try and find a natural crossing place over the Buffalo River. Vitally important to him because attached to his column are vast wagons. If one was to put 20 of these wagons, plus their oxen nose to tail, they cover a mile. Each one of these wagons actually has a potential payload of 8 tons. Put 1 wagon and 16 oxen on a piece of ground, they covered 75 yards. his scouts finds this natural drift or ford at Rorke's Drift, which is the only one of its kind 50 miles up or down the Buffer. So consequently, Chelmsford now has to commandeer the farm at Rorke Drift. It's a 3,000 hectare farm, time is owned by a Swedish missionary. He's going to take over what had been the house and turn it into a hospital, take over what had been the church and turn it into a store. Just as soon as the ultimatum has been issued by Sir Bartle Frere, Lord Chelmsford now moves his column from Helpmacard down to Rorke Drift, but they camp for approximately 3 weeks until the expiry date of the ultimatum. Now, Lord Chelmsford's column of 4,800 men, the backbone of that column, 40% of it, is made up of this British Imperial Regiment called the 24th of Foot, which at this stage of its history was in fact the 2nd Warwickshire Regiment. There are 2 battalions out here, the 1st and 2nd Battalion. All these men were drawn from the south of Birmingham. They're Englishmen, Irishmen and Welshmen. And every 10 is armed with an old-fashioned rifle, maybe got 10 rounds of ammunition. They all wore a red band around their heads, so the Imperial troops from Britain couldn't in fact identify them from the Zulus themselves. They were called the NNC, Natal Native Contingent. Now, Lord Chelmsford has never seen his native troops in battle, and the day after he invades Zululand, on the 12th of January, he's going to try them out on this very wealthy Zulu chieftain's kraal called CIO, who's the regional chief of this area at the time. Part of CIO's kraal is villages set in caves in the top of a cliff. It's going to be a comparatively simple exercise. What they do is they put the native troops in from the front, backed up by 4 companies of white troops, approximately 400 men. And they use those white troops to physically go into the caves with their fixed bayonets in order to get the Zulus out. During that particular part of the skirmish, there were 30 Zulus who got themselves killed, and there were 9 white soldiers who got wounded. And the 9 wounded soldiers were sent back to that hospital at Rorke Drift, and they come into our story at Rorke Drift. It's pouring with rain. Those big wagons are now getting stuck in the mud, they're getting stuck in the rocks. Lord Chelmsford now realises it's going to take his column 10 days to cover the 10 miles from Rorke Drift up in the plains of Zululand. On the morning of the 17th of January, he broke away from his column and he came up in the plains of Zululand. Chelmsford was looking for a base camp, and he really wanted a base camp right up at the eastern end of this plain, from whence he then might be able to launch an attack on the King's Kraal, the King's Palace, which is 55 miles due east of the mountain of Isandlwana, straight up the centre of this plain, over the top of the mountains at the eastern end, and on about another 45 miles. He finds this mountain called Isandlwana and selects this spot as a temporary base camp for 2-3 nights. And he wrote of it, "I have found the most perfect spot for a small contingent of British troops to defend." Afternoon of the 17th of January, he returned to join his column. It's the same day, the 17th of January, the Zulu king, a man by the name of Chetshwayo, summoned all his Ndunas, his chiefs, to his kraal, and he briefed them. He told them the British had invaded his kingdom, his intention to sweep them back across the Buffer. He told them the British soldiers were dressed in red, which plays a part in the number of soldiers going to get off this battlefield. He told them, "I don't want you to fight the British on the day of the dead moon. The day of the dead moon is a day on which is going to be an eclipse of the sun. It's a holiday as far as Zulu is concerned. They don't get married, they don't bury their dead, but if they have to fight, they will." It's probable the Zulus didn't know exactly when the day of the dead moon was going to occur, but they've certainly got it down within 24 hours. We have to remember at this stage, we're not actually talking about a proper eclipse at this moment, we're talking about the monthly event when the sun and the moon go behind each other. And that's what the witch doctors will know all about. The extraordinary thing about this battle is when the British are putting up their final stand, there's going to be a 76% eclipse of the sun. Strangely enough, Lord Chelmsford also wanted to fight the Zulus out in the plain, but using the good old British square, which had proved so successful through the years. And finally he tells them, under no circumstances will any of you cross the Buffer into Natal. And he stresses, it's not I that wish to fight the British, it's the British who invaded my kingdom. Afternoon of the 17th of January, all those Zulu warriors now left the King's Kraal, and supposedly nobody knew where they'd gone. It's the afternoon of the 20th of January as Lord Chelmsford finally arrives up here with his column, and he makes his encampment. Hundreds and hundreds of little white bell tents, right across the front of the mountain for about 1,200 yards. He does not lager, he does not entrench. Prior to Chelmsford invading Zululand, lots of Boer commanders, including Paul Kruger, had come up to Lord Chelmsford and his staff officers at Rorke Drift and explained to them, these Zulus are not the same as the causes in the Eastern Cape you've been fighting for the last 2 years. These Zulus are tactically sound, they're fast moving. You don't lager, you don't entrench, they're going to kill you. On the evening of the 20th of January, Lord Chelmsford instructs two officers. The following morning, they're going to take out a very large reconnaissance patrol into that mountain range on the southern side of the plain. Just think of the figures. 3:30 in the morning of the 21st, a total of 1,670 men are going to leave this camp. There's a man called Major Dartnell, who's a very experienced colonial policeman, who's told to leave this camp with 70 mounted men, and it goes straight to the eastern end of that mountain range. There's a man called Lieutenant Lonsdale, who's told to leave this camp with 1,600 native troops on foot, to start off at the western end of that range of mountains, an area called the Malakata, march up that range of mountains until it's time to join up with Dartnell. The purpose was to find the Zulu army or to find information pertaining to their whereabouts. 3:30 in the morning of the 21st, there's two patrols going out. It's 2:30 on the afternoon of the 21st. Lonsdale has now joined up with Dartnell. They both come across small pockets of Zulus. They've asked a standard question: where is the Zulu army? The only answer they got was the Zulu army was summoned to the King's Cross on the 17th, but nobody knew where it had gone from then. Major Dartnell is now going to take command of that entire contingent, and he's going to split it into two. Please look at the high point of that mountain range. Go east, go left, look carefully, see the mountain range drops and another one flat bit. Got it? Mm-hmm. The last 2 miles of that mountain range are known to the Zulus as the Mountains of the Blue Blood. It's because of the colour of the rock. Now the other side of that mountain range, flowing from east to west, is what is called the Mangeni River. It flows into the Buffalo River. At the eastern end of the Mangeni River, straight over the top of the Mountains of the Blue Blood, is the Mangeni Waterfall. To complete the buffalo horns around him, he just gets out in time without casualty and falls back on top of the Mountains of Blue Blood. Lonsdale joins him up there at about 6:30 that evening. Contrary to Lord Chelmsford's orders, these two officers now decide to camp up in the mountains that night without food and without bedding, Chelmsford having told them to be back in the camp by dusk. They basically decide to stay out there to try and watch the Zulus who tried to ambush Dartnell. At about 8:30 that night, they notice hundreds and hundreds of bonfires spread virtually the entire length of that mountain range to the east of the plain and the hills to the southeast. The combination of those bonfires, plus the fact that Dartnell had been ambushed, convinces Major Dartnell that he has found the Zulu army. In the middle of the night, he sends a man called Lieutenant Walsh back to this camp with a dispatch for Lord Chelmsford. Walsh is going to ride in this camp at just after midnight, and that dispatch read very clearly: I have found the Zulu army. I require reinforcements and permission to attack the following morning. Now, Major Dartnell is in fact only calling for 2 companies of Imperial troops, approximately 200 men. And the reason he's calling for support of Imperial troops is because when all those fires occurred, his native troops, the NNC, took fright. They tried to flee. They couldn't flee, but they tried to flee. They knew that those fires had been started by the Zulu army. This, of course, is where Lord Chelmsford makes his abomination of an error. Without knowing the strength of the enemy or their exact location, in the early hours of the morning of the 22nd of January, he decides to split his force in this camp yet again. 4:30 in the morning of the 22nd of January, Lord Chelmsford marches out of this camp with approximately another 1,000 men, which includes the whole of the 2nd Battalion of the 24th Foot, bar 1 company. And all these Imperial soldiers march out of here carrying 70 rounds of ammunition, no reserve ammunition. And they march the 13 miles out to join Dartnell at Mangeni Falls. He's left in this camp 1,774 men, a fighting force of 696 soldiers of the 24th Foot, 80 Royal Artillery, 175 Natal Carbineers and Natal Police, white service in the colony, and 450 native troops. The balance of the cooks, the bottle washers, etc.